catering for Our Lady of Peace. Can I ask the panel to nominate a chairman, please?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Chris Baring as the chair.
I will second that, Councillor Lindsay Ferris.
Okay, Chris, you've been elected chair, so I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Luciani. So referring to the agenda on whatever page it is, I ask my colleagues whether they have any declarations of interest before we move on to the application. Any interest declarations?
No, no, Chair.
Hear any? Okay. To start the meeting, I outlined the procedure and reaffirmed that only information relevant to representations can be considered, and such information must be relevant to the licensing objectives. Is everyone able to understand this? The four objectives are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. And can I ask everyone perhaps to introduce themselves now? I'm Councillor Chris Baring. I represent Wokingham Without ward. Perhaps we go around the table, the virtual table in some order. Perhaps my two colleagues first can introduce themselves.
Yes, good morning. My name's Councillor Lindsay Ferris. I am a member for Twyford.
Good morning. My name is Abdul Lewis. I represent Loddon Ward in Woodley.
In some order, I think Mr. Boardman is here.
Hello, yes,
Hello.
yes, Chair.
Good morning,
Can you not,
applicant.
yeah, can you not see me? Yes, I'm chairman of Our Lady of Peace Catholic Club. Good morning to you all.
Good morning. We have Mr. Brooks, who's proposed DPS.
That's correct.
Mr. Graham Wren, who is licensing officer.
Morning, yes.
Red. I see there are some other, Mr. Bebb, the interested party.
Yes, I'm Peter Bebb, interested party.
My name's Gary Clark. I'm the licensing officer for Thames Valley Police.
Mr. Clark from Thames Valley Police. Anybody else I missed out?
I'm Anthony Lenihan. I'm the legal advisor to the subcommittee.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I play no part in the decision-making process, but I advise the panel as to any legal points they may raise with me.
Okay, that's fine. So, we now move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the item 5, which is the licensing officer to introduce the hearing report and update the subcommittee on any developments following publication of the report whenever required. Thank you. Mr. Wren, Graham Wren, please, could you present the report?
Thank you. Good morning, members. Good morning, Chair. My name's Graham Wren. I'm a licensing officer, licensing department from the Public Protection Partnership. Premises licence application has been submitted to the licensing department from Mr. Philip Boardman of Our Lady of Peace Catholic Club, 228 Wokingham Road, Early. You'll have sight of the hearing pack and the licensable activities that are applied for. A representation has been received, and I'll give some detail surrounding it. Before I do that, I need to advise the panel of a slight technicality involving the application, site notice and newspaper advertisement. Firstly, there's a typing error I need to point out. The application was received on the 11th of December, not the 17th, so apologies for that. So the consultation ran from the 12th. Also, in the list of licensable activities applied for with the actual licensing, the license application we're to just discuss today, one of the items initially applied for was late night refreshment. I emphasised this, that it was sent to the applications team. However, it was discovered after the consultation period had ended that the late night refreshment, which is the sale of alcohol, the sale of hot food or drinks between 2300 hours and 0500 hours was unfortunately omitted from the site notice and newspaper advertisement. Therefore, the hearing today would be unable to allow late night refreshment to be included in any decision. You'll see that the paper I've prepared for you today doesn't include late night refreshment. Legal representative is aware of this, and also the applicant has been made aware of this prior to today and is happy for the hearing to go ahead minus the late night refreshment. I will also make comment, if I may, regarding the presentation of the representation you have received. The representation was received on the last day of the consultation period, so it was legally received, I will add. The quite lengthy text was discussed between myself and the licensing manager. It's quite obvious to us that a great deal of the submitted representation was not relevant within the context of the Licensing Act regarding representations, although it was decided that the representation was valid. The timing of the submission didn't permit any discussion as is preferred. The Licensing Act does stipulate that even if the representation is borderline, that the benefit of doubt should be given to the person making the representation, then obviously onto a hearing if mediation has failed. There was no time to discuss the matter with Mr. Bell for the representation to be resubmitted, as this would obviously be outside of the regulatory representation time limit. So the representation is presented as received. I then come on to the way in which the representation to yourselves. We could choose to completely disseminate the text, and we may be left with just a few lines and spent a lot of time today discussing and putting the text into context, and this could take a lot of time to discuss what was removed. So we thought this would be very difficult and could delay the hearing. Therefore, it was decided by the licensing department to prevent the representation full text. And as I said in my hearing paper, all mediations have unfortunately failed to receive an appropriate solution between both parties. Thank you.
You said that the application for late night refreshment was not advertised. Is there anything else that wasn't advertised that's before us this morning?
No, Chair.
So the hours of operation, proposed hours of operation, the extended hours were in the
site notices and the advertisement, yes. Well, there's no stipulation to put the actual hours in the site notice, but the rest of the advertised or applied for activities were correct.
Right. So just to ask Anthony, we are therefore determining everything before us. Anthony?
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with what Mr. Wren said. Yeah, yes, and that is the way forward. The applicant was made aware of that, and you can determine this application in line with what Mr. Wren said.
I don't know whether it's appropriate to ask at this point, but why is the premises license being applied for when there's already a club premises certificate? Or perhaps I should ask the applicant, would that be better?
Yes, either the applicant or the licensing officer can speak to that.
Mr. Wren, can you respond to that?
The club premises certificate per se does restrict, because it's down to a members club, and obviously we do have this 48-hour period, and it's become fairly common in recent months for clubs to adjust to allow the freedom to make their premises more commercially viable, and they're not stuck on restrictions for membership.
Okay. Sorry.
Could I ask a question, Chris? Lindsay here.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I just want to ask Graham Wren about the extra hours, because we were talking before the meeting. Would the public generally know that the hours were being included, that there was a request for an extension of hours in what was advertised in the newspaper?
Well, I mean, you raise a good point, Councillor, but this is the Licensing Act, and I mean, funny enough, we did have a conversation a few weeks ago about this, and hours on site notices, there's no stipulation to put that down. What it does do, it alerts the public that there is a change or there is something going on at the premises. So that's when they can apply, because there's simply not enough room on a site notice to put down every single thing. So it alerts the public that there's something going on, and then they can apply for the full application. And it's also on the council websites normally.
Do we usually indicate there's a request for an extension of time, or is it the advert as this was put in the paper, a standard advert?
There will always be a standard template, sir, and depending on what the licensable activity is applied for would depend on whether it's a minor variation or a full variation. It would normally, when we get onto that, that's normally extension of alcohol hours. But for slight amendments, then there's no need for certainly, but there is for a minor, you get a white notice. But for smaller things, adjustments, there's a tier approach, if you like, small, medium, and large, for want of a better word. So it would depend, sir, on what they would be applying for.
Well, would you consider this as small, medium, or large?
Because it's alcohol, sir, it has to be a well, this is a different license, so it would be a full variation or a completely different license, because they want to change the type of running of the club to bring in more revenue.
What I'm getting to is, would the public who would have seen the advert in the paper realise that there was a request for an extension of time with what was advertised? I'm not 100% certain that most people would realise it. We do have one, the neighbour immediately beside the property who's here today, but I'm thinking wider as to what the sort of general population around the area would have been aware of. And I think I just need to have clarification either from Graham or Anthony.
Yep, go ahead. It's not a legal requirement, we've heard, for the actual hours changes to be advertised. That's correct, isn't it? So
yes, but I just asked whether this was considered a major one, and they said it was an alcohol one, so it is. So I would presume that our normal adverts that put in the newspaper would indicate an indication that there was an extension of time. And if that's what we usually do, then that's what I would expect to be done. And if we haven't, whilst it might be technically legal, and therefore we're looking at it, I have what I call the moral aspect of what our residents need to think about and to do it. And that's not any thing to do with the applicant that's here today. I'm just a bit concerned that have we done things correctly, appropriately, not necessarily strictly legal, because if you normally indicate that there's an extension of license because of alcohol, then please say so. And if you're not, and you don't, then that's another thing.
Was it made clear in the advertisement, Mr. Wren, that there was an hours change? Just to go over that again.
There's not a format to say that this premises is running under a club license and they're changing to a premises license. The format legally is to apply for a premises license, which is what has been done.
So I think what's been done is legal, correct? And that we need to, therefore, we need to consider it in the usual way through this meeting. Lindsay, okay? Abdul, Did you have any other? Well, I'll come to Abdul. Abdul, any questions? You're muted.
Thank you, Chair. As we hear just now, members clubs becoming into open market club. How many members do we have at the moment as we speak, or do we have any idea, Mr. Wren?
Probably a question for the applicant, I would think.
Okay, then I'll leave this question until the applicant talks then. Okay, we can move forward.
Okay, thanks. Can I go to page 41, the section here on the where you've printed the current certificate? There's some highlighting in yellow. Can you explain what that means, please, Mr. Wren?
It was just a reference on some of the conditions that are on the club premises certificate at the moment, and just put there for information, really. If that was brought up in the hearing, well, I think it is going to be brought up in the hearing, but I can just stress that this is a new application, a completely separately new application, and these points are just put on for reference to assist the committee.
Thank you. But those particular conditions, I'm looking at Annex 5 on page 49, that they are not currently being proposed in the premises application, are they? Is that correct?
Just getting to the right page, Councillor Chair. But no, I mean, and I highlighted some, the one about the priest I highlighted, which is I've certainly never seen that before, where the priest could effectively extend the licensable activities he calls an event, and also it's to highlight the fire doors one, which is what we might be speaking about today. It's just put on there for information, Chair.
Thank you, understand. There is, I think it's page 41, special days are referred to, which are you happy that we could enforce this license were it to be granted, where it's defined special days rather vaguely, where I think it could go on till 3 o'clock, 3 a.m.
Special days, it's special timings. I mean, these are laid down by the Secretary of State sometimes for special occasions.
That's in law, is it?
Pardon?
That's in law, is it? So we know what those days are, the special days, because they're not listed, are they?
They can make special events for certain days across the country. Perhaps the legal advisor will be able to advise you on that one.
So the applicant doesn't make his own special days up?
Well, yes, you can to a certain extent, and put it in the licence, but then there will be overriding special days which will come across all premises licences sometimes.
I see it's mentioned that there's been a hearing, I think in 2005, on the premises licence. Was that the conversion from the previous legislation to the 2003 Act, so-called grandfather rights conversion?
I can only comment on being around in 2005 in the Licensing Act, and not here. There didn't necessarily have to be a hearing. There sounds like there was a hearing on this particular one. A lot of things in 2005 just changed over from the 1964 Act, unless there was a change to licensable activities. Most of them changed over, but I can't comment on the hearing that was had.
Okay, so we don't know what happened at the hearing. What caused it? Which do you not think that could be of some relevance if there was a representation against the club premises licence at that point?
Well, so representations have to be relevant and they have to be reasonable. That's at 2005. We're now in 2021. That's all I'd say on that.
Okay. Thank you. That's my colleagues. Are there any other points they wish to raise at this point for the licensing officer? No. Okay, so I'll come to Mr. Boardman. You'll have a chance to put forward your case later. Are there any particular points of clarification you'd like to ask Mr. Wren at this stage?
Not at this stage, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask the same of Mr. Brooks? I guess you're together, so Mr. Brooks, I guess you haven't got any points. Mr. Bebb, the interested party. Any points to clarify there, Mr. Bebb? Would you go ahead?
Just one point, Chair. From my calculations, the hearing is taking place outside the 20 working days allowed to hold the hearing, according to the Licensing Act 2003 Hearings Regulation 2005. Is my calculation correct? And if so, what's the reason for the delay?
Can someone respond to that, please, Anthony? Or...
It's 21 days after the end of the consultation period.
I read in the regulation that it's 20 days.
After the end of the consultation period.
Correct.
Well, by my calculations, this was the last day.
And by my calculations, it was the day before.
What's the last day of the consultation? When did the consultation finish?
Graham, can you help with that?
The 8th, as far as I'm aware.
The 8th of
January.
20, is it, are we talking about working days or just days? Working days, I guess.
It's working days.
Working days. So 20 working days after that is 4 weeks. Shall we just check this because this is possibly important? Just do it on my phone. Can you do it, Luciani?
Yeah, sorry, Graham, what did you say was the last day of the consultation?
As far as I'm aware, it's the 8th. I'm just looking through my paperwork.
Of January?
Yes.
You agree with that, Mr. Bebb?
Yes, I do.
Add 20 working days on to the 8th of January. Where do we get to?
Friday the 5th would be the exact 20 days. So today is technically the 21st day.
So we have to dispute between 20 or 21. What are you referring to, Mr. Bebb, when you say 20?
I'm referring to Schedule 1 of Regulation 5 of the Licensing Act 2003 Hearings Regulations 2005.
Can we check on that?
Anthony, do you have a view on that?
My view is it's within the correct time. I'm just checking the regulation that Mr. Bebb just raised. Yes, 20 working days beginning with the day after the end of the period. So today is the last day.
Okay, I'll take that as our legal advice.
Yes.
Okay.
20, just a period of time within which the hearing must be commenced. Determination of application for a premises license, 18.3a, 20 working days beginning with the day after the end of the period during which representations may be made as prescribed under section 17.5c.
So the 9th of January is day number 1.
Yes.
And today, the 8th of February is date number 20.
Yes.
21.
Yes.
21. So we're okay. Is that resolved?
Yeah.
Well, let's leave it. We'll leave it there for the moment. If you come back, Mr. Pepper, later. I'll come to Mr. Clark from Thames Valley Police. Do you have anything you'd like to raise with the licensing officer?
No.
Okay.
I'm muted now. No, I'm quite happy.
Only got the top half of your head. Oh, you're bouncing up and down.
Yeah, it's my phone moving around. Trying to hear it.
Yeah, difficult with a phone. Have I covered everybody? Yes, I think I have. So where are we? I think we go to onto the applicant. Mr. Boardman, would you like to present your case, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm chairman of Our Lady of Peace Catholic Club, and I have been in post for 20 years. The club itself is owned by the Catholic Diocese of Portsmouth and has been in existence for over 40 years. We operate as a members club with a constitution and annual membership subscription. Membership is open to all, regardless of race, colour, creed, and we regard ourselves as an outreach to the local community. Our prime motivation in applying for a new licence is fourfold. First of all, the conditions on the current licence. You will have seen that the current licence contains two very onerous conditions which we are anxious to remove. First of all, we're constrained from opening the fire doors except for maintenance, with the additional requirement to give 24 hours notice to our neighbour, Mr. Bebb, of our intention to do so. This exit gives much needed ventilation in the summer and ready access to our storage sheds. Without the use of this door, we have to go around the full perimeter of the building to access those sheds. The requirement to give 24 hours notice is very prescriptive in our view. We would not use this as the main club entrance, but would wish to use it to access the patio and playgroup area, which is the only accessible route for wheelchair access. Likewise, we are constrained by the current licence conditions from opening our windows. Without this, it gets very stuffy in the club lounge, particularly during the summer months. This enables viruses such as cold, flu and COVID to incubate, and we are advised by Public Health England to allow a good circulation of fresh air. We only have a recirculating air conditioning system, which we've been advised not to use as it could simply spread viruses around the club. We would like these two licence conditions removed so that we can properly ventilate the club lounge. Since smoking is no longer allowed in the club room and we do not offer a hot meal menu, malodours are unlikely to be a problem for our neighbours. Second point, use of patio area and play area. For the same reason, in the warmer weather, many of our members would very much like to use the patio and play area for drinks. Our application is to allow us use of this area for licensed activities. Third point, off sales. Both the club and the licensing authorities have noted a contradiction in our current license. We would like to clarify that our license covers off sales as well as on sales. Whilst off sales are very unlikely to form a large part of our business model, we would like to have that option. Fourth point, extended opening hours, which you've talked about a fair bit. We're requesting extended permitting opening hours by 1 hour. Our regular pre-COVID hours are from 7:30 until 11:30 latest, and 12 noon till 4 p.m. on Sundays. These are much less than our current licence allows, but we need the flexibility of the extended hours applied for to cater for exceptional circumstances and special occasions, including those listed on the application. And just to add to what you were talking about earlier about special circumstances, Graham's right, there are certain bank holidays and such that are declared by the government, but for example, we've been quite specific as to those occasions when we would like the very much extended hours. St George's Day, St Patrick's Day, those sort of occasions, they're all listed in the application, Chair. That concludes my introduction.
Thank you very much. Council members, Abdul, do you have any questions, Mr. Boardman?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Borden, yes, I did ask a question. How many members do you have at the moment?
Can I suggest that Mr. Brooks answers that one? He's our technical guru as far as databases are concerned.
Absolutely.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Approximately at the moment, we have about 330 registered members. It's an annual subscription. It has reduced this particular year, of course, just due to COVID. People haven't renewed like they normally do. So I would estimate we normally run about 400 people, not all attending the complex at the same time. They spread themselves out.
Thank you, Chair. Approximately on weekend, what sort of figure you reckon you get the turnout?
It can range from, on a, shall we say, Saturday night, it could range from about 5 to 10 people, or if we put on some form of entertainment, we could land up with more. There is obviously a limit of the number of people, fire safety, etc., that can fit into the complex at any one time.
Chairman, you just put into fire safety. This red line you've given us, you know, this the map work, you are extending the play area and so on. Yeah. Did you have any sort of indication if this were to go ahead with the approval, what sort of fire regulation you have to do, any amendments or anything to do with the building works?
We've had no further indication. We're still complying internally with our regulations, which have always been up to date.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come back.
Right. And Royal Berks Fire Service will have received a copy of this application.
Correct.
Lindsay.
Thank you. Just to have an idea, how many large events do you hold on average a year?
Well, sorry, maybe I'll answer that one. When you say large events, we like to have a function in the hall, if we can, once a month. But more recently, last year or two, it's been 3 or 4 a year.
And how many have gone on to midnight and the like?
The same number, I would estimate.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Lindsay? Can I ask your application to remove the condition? Well, not remove it because it's a separate certificate, isn't it? But the opening the windows. What about the public nuisance from noise which would emanate? How are you going to not disturb neighbours like Mr. Pebb?
Can I ask Colin Brooks to answer that one? He's our bar manager and our DPS.
Oh, well, obviously we need to be aware of our neighbours, Peter and anyone else. The windows, it depends on the evening. We are fully aware that after 11 o'clock, we would, if it's noisy, well, we'd generally be closing then anyway. On a night when there's 5 or 10 people in there, it's not particularly noisy. On a night, if we had some form of live entertainment, we're obviously conscious that creates noise. Therefore, we would control the noise by closing the windows as required. It's a case of reacting to what is actually happening at the time.
Okay, Mr. Pebb is the immediate neighbour. I think it's just this is on Woking Road going up to Winnersh, isn't it? That side.
No, Reading.
The Reading side, is it?
Yeah.
It's an immediate neighbour. Are there any other neighbours? I mean, domestic neighbours' houses. Are there? So opening the windows, was that on only one side of the premises? Or was
Can
that
I
the-
answer that, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, we only have windows to one side of the club room. They are the only windows in the whole club. So, yeah, if that answers your question,
Is that on the same side as Mr.
it's on
Bebb,
on
yes.
the side facing Mr. Bebb's property.
It is on his side, right? Okay.
Chair,
Yes, Abdul, go ahead.
thank you, Chair. In terms of live music, how often do you hold live music?
I would say that was when we have functions. Some of those functions are in the club room, and some we hold in the hall. I would estimate there are things like, you know, Burns nights and Patrick's nights and so on. I would say, again, adding them both together, that would be about one a month, something like that.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? I'll move on to, if not, I'll move on to.
Yes, Philip. Are you, with the changing of your licence proposal, are you looking to hold more such events?
Well, we would like to get back more or less to where we were, which is one a month, you know, large enough for us to use the hall.
Okay.
To be honest with you, the organisation of those large events, because we're all volunteers, the organisation of those large events really is quite time consuming, and we really don't have the manpower to organise more than one a month, in honesty.
Chris, Chair, can I come back to one more point?
Of course, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. As we had fire door access to the shed. Yeah. Is this where your storage are kept? Your safe
That's right, yes.
Okay. And in terms of windows, you mentioned just one window. Is that just one window, or is it various other windows?
Sorry, if I misled you there, I'm sorry. We have two windows. The fire door is central on that wall, and windows are with windows either side of it.
Thank you, Chair. Well,
can you just point me to where you're doesn't say explicitly in the application that you'll be opening the windows? I know it's a condition on the club certificate. So just environmental health have not objected to this, but they would know that there's a possibility. Obviously, windows can be opened. But you haven't explicitly said that in the application, I don't think, have you? And
no, we didn't, because we thought it was sufficient to just ask that the what we would regard as prescriptive conditions be removed. Yep. We think it's normal that people should be allowed to open windows. I don't know whether there are any other premises that have this sort of onerous condition placed upon them.
Can I just make
Graham, could you comment on that, Graham?
Yeah, yes, I can comment on having dealt with many hundreds of premises licenses. Nobody has to say in any premise license application that I am going to open the windows.
No, so environmental health, obviously, windows can be opened. That's the nature of windows, isn't it? So that would be a possibility they would have considered.
Yes, the only time that stipulations will come, in my experience, is when there has been numerous noise complaints and environmental health have got involved.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other points to raise? I'd come on to the other gentleman. Okay, Mr. Bebb.
Yes.
Yes, please. Don't present your case, just to clarification again, the applicant.
May I ask questions of the applicant, Chair?
Yeah, yes, of course.
Thank you. Is the club membership stable or volatile?
I would say, well, it's a little bit difficult to say at the moment because of COVID, which is a fairly unique, hopefully unique circumstance. But I would say well, just to for all the members, maybe I should just explain that we are an ageing demographic. Most of our members, I would say, 70 or 80% of our members are over 50. Most of us, frankly, are, in our 60s and 70s. So we're not going to be too raucous, and I hope that that's been the case over the last 15 years since we've held the license. Sorry, I've forgotten what was the point of the question again. Sorry.
Is the membership stable or volatile?
Well, yeah, we're all dying off, in honesty, Mr. Bebb.
Yeah.
Peter, sorry. We're all dying off. So I would say it's gradually reducing.
Okay, thank you. Just for the avoidance of doubt, would the club intend to hire the halls out to the general public for licensable activities if the license is granted?
Yes, on an occasional basis.
Okay. Do you have any feel at the moment for how many public events there might be in a year?
Well, we've had temporary event notices in the last year, and I think we've had 2.
Right.
That's during the pandemic, though.
Well, we haven't been able to have any temporary event notices during the pandemic, so this was in the time leading up. I don't think we had any. Perhaps Colin could confirm this. I don't think we had any in the period between July the 4th and November, when we were open on a sort of a restricted basis.
No, because of social distancing requirements. In the previous year or previous years, we would probably be running, you normally apply or used to apply for the Thameslink. Probably the maximum would have been 10 to 12 a year.
Not even that, Colin. No, I think I generally keep a list, and I think probably at the most we've got to is about 5. That was a very good year, by the way.
Why do the club believe that temporary event notices are no longer sufficient?
Well, first of all, they cost £20, which puts a fair number of people off, because they've got to pay not only for bar staff, they've got to pay for the hire of the hall, and on top of that, there's a temporary event notice cost as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment on temporary event notices to try and help people, if I may, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Any premise can apply for or allow a temporary event up to 15 times a year. Now, that doesn't have to be the occupiers of the premises. So therefore, any license that is currently in force at the premises is almost non and void, if you like. So any member of the public can hire out any premise. Now, the public do not have any. This is why what I'm getting at is the idea, or the ideal, if you like, to put activities within a premises license, which has been my advice for years, and probably is the police as well, because although TENs or temporary event notices are regulated, the public don't have a say in their. They only get. I come along afterwards sometimes if complaints happen, but it's happened then, and it could be somebody renting, for want of a better word, the premise, and then they've gone. So my advice has always been try and include everything within a premises license, because everybody's more accountable. And then, like Philip is saying, they don't have to pay for all these applications. So they don't necessarily use those hours all the time. So it puts it into context as a bit of responsibility, if you like, and protection, I feel personally, for the local community to limit TENs and let the activities be included within the premises license.
Okay.
I'm just checking our records here at TVP. 2016 was the last time that there was any, what I would call a regular request for a temporary event notice at the premises. Our records indicate there was only one in 2018 and one in 2020.
Okay, Mr. Mr. Bebb, any further questions?
Well, yeah, I wonder, given the fact that public events occur so infrequently, the need for a permit, a change of license, sorry.
Would you like to respond?
Well, I think that's one for Mr. Wren, for Graham Wren.
Well, I think it's rather, it's possibly irrelevant to this, that the application is for a premises license, and that's what we're here to discuss. I think I'm highlighting the possibilities. I mean, personally speaking, it's more probably a safety net, because as I've just explained, temporary events, Mr. Bebb, you wouldn't have, and I explained this to you on the telephone, you wouldn't have any say on any temporary event. You wouldn't have any comment that it's happening. So possibly it's better that any events are included within a premises license.
That wasn't my question, Chair. My question was that there have been very few temporary events and temporary event notices applied for. That being so, why is there a need to apply for a premises license? Why would not the club license plus the very occasional temporary event notice suffice?
I think the licensing officer is saying it's not relevant. You can apply for a premises license and you've objected to it, and so we need to hold this hearing.
Yes. Are we not here to discuss the need for a premises license?
I believe we are not.
Okay, thank you.
Well, no, I'm going to just check with Anthony. Is that irrelevant? The necessity for a premises license, is that material?
Well, the application is for a premises license, yes, as opposed to the club license. As Mr. Wren pointed out earlier, there are advantages. One advantage, and Mr. Wren will correct me if I'm wrong, is that under the club license, as was, there's no requirement for a designated premises supervisor. So from an enforcement perspective, a premises license is better all round, because there is a requirement for designated premises supervisor under a premises license.
But even so, there's no necessity to prove. You don't need to show it's necessary. Anybody can apply for a premises license.
Yes.
For a frivolous reason, if they wish.
Yes.
It's frivolous.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Clark, Thames Valley Police. Don't see you. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get unmuted. Sorry, is there a question for me, or you just want?
Sorry, would you ask the question for clarification?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Would you like to ask the applicant a question on what they have said for clarification?
No, I mean, as far as Thames Valley Police are concerned, we supplied a list of conditions that we felt were relevant for the change of this licence, and we had no concerns raised by our local neighbourhood policing team. So we support the application basically at this stage.
Thank you. I think I covered everybody. So now come on to Mr. Bebb. Can you present your case why we should not grant this premises licence, please?
Certainly. Well, I know now that parts of my representation are irrelevant to the licensing objectives, and I would like, therefore, with the subcommittee's permission, to focus on those parts which I believe to be relevant and explain their irrelevance to the promotion of the licensing objectives.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, for the sake of brevity, would the subcommittee permit me to abbreviate references to relevant parties and documents? Sorry. For example, Secretary of State's revised guidance issued under Section 182 of the Licensing Act 2003 in April 2018, may I refer to that as the Secretary of State's guidance?
Yep, so section 182 is relevant material, I believe.
Yeah.
And again, for brevity, to refer to the Council's Statement of Licensing Policy issued in September 2018 as simply the licensing policy?
Yes.
Okay, fine, thank you. So my family and I, as I say in my representation, live approximately 4.7 metres from the applicant's premises and would be directly affected by the application in front of you. There will be another neighbour who will be affected by the application. There's a new house just being built, which is at the rear of the applicant's premises, and they would also be affected by activities such as the use of the patio by the club. As you well know, paragraph 7.1 of the licensing policy states that the licensing authority interprets public nuisance in its widest sense, takes it to include such issues as noise, light, odour, litter, and antisocial behaviour. And public nuisance could include low-level nuisance, perhaps affecting just a few people living locally. Between 1985 and 2005, we suffered public nuisance consisting of noise, odour and light pollution from the club's unauthorised use of the hall extension, including loud music through unauthorised amplifiers, raucous shouting and laughter, the clanging of beer barrels, and the crashing of bottles as they were thrown into the bin at unpredictable times of the day and night, vehicle horns sounding, car doors slamming and engines starting between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, obstruction of our access by the delivery lorry and members' vehicles, the odours of stale air, beer and cigarette smoke wafting over our garden from the open windows and doors, making the garden unusable for recreation, light pollution until midnight from the security lights outside the club, shining into our daughter's bedroom window, light pollution all night from the very bright light at the entrance to the car park, shining into another bedroom window, graffiti placed on our property by hirers of the hall. The nuisances were reported to the Church and Wokingham District Council as it was then. The club repeatedly assured me and the council that the nuisances would cease, but they continued. The Planning Department, the Environmental Health Department and the Licensing Committee negotiated 23 conditions with the club to prevent the public nuisances. The conditions are attached to the club's current club licence and since 2005 have promoted the licensing objectives. Since 2005, because of course the licensing objectives came into force only with the Licensing Act 2003. And the reason for the meeting you referred to earlier, Chair, in 2005, or the hearing rather, was that all clubs were required to reapply to conform with the Licensing Act 2003. History indicates that if the conditions are taken away, the licensing objectives won't be promoted, because that's what happened before the conditions were applied. From 2005, crimes have been associated with the club. The club is accessed via Allbourne Avenue. The traffic regulation order made in 2005 prohibits a driver from causing their vehicle to wait in Allbourne Avenue when there is space on the premises being accessed. Before the pandemic, the regulation was broken weekly by the driver of the lorry delivering drinks to the club and by users of the church premises at Sunday lunchtimes when only the club is open. When I politely informed the offenders about the traffic regulation, I was verbally abused and threatened. The delivery lorry driver leaves litter such as caps and cans on Allbourne Avenue. There are two ways of dealing with problems: prevention or cure. The criminal justice system mainly takes the former approach, retrospectively punishing offenders. The Licensing Act takes, the latter approach. The Licensing Act takes the former approach, seeking through conditions to prevent public nuisance, crime and disorder, and prevent harm to children and the public. Paragraph 2.18 of the Secretary of State's guidance confirms that the approach of licensing authorities and responsible authorities should be one of prevention. Therefore, any potential nuisance should be prevented from occurring in the first place rather than dealt with in a reactive way after it has occurred. The application before us seeks to omit all 23 conditions in the club licence, extend the licensed area to the whole hall building and its environment, license the licensed area for member and public use until 1 AM every day of the year, including Christmas Day and Good Friday, permit licensable activities from 6 AM until 3 AM for unrestricted special events, extend the licensable activities from only indoors to both indoors and outdoors, and allow the windows and fire doors of the bar lounge to be opened at will. The omission of the club conditions and the increased number of participants in licensable activities would almost certainly cause much greater public nuisance, crime and disorder than occurred before the club conditions were applied. On page 12 of the agenda, there's a statement. The club is keen to reassure the council and others that they will retain club rules to maintain standards, but won't be legally restricted with regards to their club certificate. If the club aren't legally restricted, they won't be bound to promote the licensing objectives, nor prevented from causing public nuisance, crime and disorder, harm to children and the public, which would be contrary to the preventive nature of the Licensing Act. Reassurances are insufficient because the club have a history of promising to prevent public nuisance and failing to do so. The fact that the club have applied for a licence with hardly any specific conditions on its use indicates lack of sincere commitment to promoting the licensing objectives. Paragraph 5.3 of the licensing policy states that applicants will be expected to demonstrate in their operating schedule that suitable and sufficient measures have been identified and will be implemented and maintained to reduce or prevent crime and disorder on and in the vicinity of their premises. The measures proposed in section M, paragraph B of the application form are generic and non-binding and would not prevent crime and disorder in the vicinity of the club's premises, such as the littering and illegal use of Albourne Avenue and verbal abuse. Section M, paragraph D, proposes only 4 measures to prevent public nuisance, only the second of which has been only partially effective, and the paragraph doesn't address the range of potential issues which the licensing policy requires applicants to address. Paragraph 7.4 of the licensing policy states that where premises are located near to noise-sensitive areas, e.g. residential premises or places of worship, the licensee should initially identify any particular issues which are likely to adversely affect the promotion of the objective to prevent public nuisance. Such steps as are required to deal with these identified issues should be included within the applicant's operating schedule. There are no such steps in the operating schedule in this application. Paragraph 7.5 of the licensing policy states that the licensing authority will expect to see where appropriate evidence that the following matters have been addressed in the operating schedule. Measures to address noise and vibration escaping from the premises, including noise from music and voices, consideration of the licensed hours and restrictions on when licensable activities can take place both indoors and outdoors, monitoring checks and logs for any music, prevention of noise from deliveries, waste collections or disposal of glass bottles at unsocial hours, measures to encourage quick and quiet dispersal from the premises, measures to control light to ensure it does not stray outside the boundary of the premises, measures to control nuisance associated with use of external areas, and measures to control litter and odour. There is no such evidence in the operating schedule in this application. Therefore, the application is not compliant with the licensing policy. Paragraph 8.44 of the Secretary of State's guidance states that it's expected that inquiries about the locality will assist applicants when determining the steps that are appropriate to the promotion of the licensing objectives. For example, premises with close proximity to residential premises should consider what effect this will have on their smoking, noise management and dispersal policies to ensure the promotion of the public nuisance objective. Applicants must consider all factors which may be relevant to the promotion of the licensing objectives, and where there are no known concerns, acknowledge this in their in their application. The application contains no steps to prevent noise, nuisance, odour and litter, and only one condition which only partially prevents light pollution. Therefore, the application is not compliant with the Secretary of State's guidance. Paragraph 11.4 of the licensing policy states that the decision of the subcommittee shall be accompanied with clear, cogent reasons for that decision, having had due regard to the Human Rights Act 1998 and all other relevant legislation. Article 1, Protocol 1 of the Human Rights Act states that every natural or legal person is entitled to the peaceful enjoyment of his possessions. As we live 4.7 meters away from the club, the peaceful enjoyment of our home would be prevented by the public nuisance, crime and disorder which would almost certainly be caused by the increased usage and inadequate preventive conditions proposed in the application. Therefore, the application is not compliant with the Human Rights Act. The Licensing Act states that a licensing authority must carry out its functions under this Act with a view to promoting the licensing objectives. The application before us fails to promote objectives A and C adequately by failing to comply with the licensing policy and the Secretary of State's guidance. Therefore, the application is not compliant with the Licensing Act. Since the application does not comply with the Council's licensing policy, the Secretary of State's guidance, the Licensing Act and the Human Rights Act, it should be refused.
Thank you. I just look at the existing licence, which has conditions in it. Do those conditions cover the conditions you are seeking, Mr. Bebb?
They do, but there would be a change in that there would be members of the public. It's my sense that it's easier to manage members of a club's behaviour than, shall we say, unpredictable members of the public. By unpredictable, I mean you can't predict which members of the public are going to be attending any particular event. Whereas with a club membership, you know who's going to attend, and indeed guests have to be notified to the club, that's my understanding, before they come along. So they can be made aware of the rules. Now, of course, you can make members of the public aware of the rules, but you have less control over them, is my sense.
Okay, but on the specific, what I asked was, if we were to put all the conditions in the club certificate into the premises licence, would that cover, apart from the fact that you think the premises licence is opening up to the public, it's more difficult to enforce them, would they be sufficient in your view, or are there things that aren't there which you are proposing? Like you raised rather a lot, you refer to 23 conditions. There are 23 conditions in the existing licence on page, starting from page 41. They are all in there, all 23.
They are.
And
I don't know which are mandatory and which are voluntary, but I think that I counted 23.
Right. Well, you mean mandatory for the premises licence? I assume that they must be in the premises licence proposal if they're mandatory. But those 23, were they to be transferred, apart from the different ways that the two licences work, that would cover your points, because you raised a lot of points. It's difficult to follow all of them.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, I
think.
But is there anything else that is there anything that's not in there that you were proposing?
Yes, Chair. And this is because of the extended number of users that would be permitted by the premises licence. So as mentioned in the licensing policy, I think there needs to be a full assessment of the sort of preventive measures that need to be applied in order to prevent and in order to promote the licensing objectives. So I'm not in a position to say what those would be, but I do believe they would be more than are contained in the club license.
when you say extended number of users, you mean at a particular time, do you? Or do you just mean the overall population who could use the facility?
Overall, there's no limit on that I can see in the application.
Yeah, the entire population could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's okay.
Chair, could I just make a point on what you've just said, please, Chair?
Yes.
Reference the conditions that are on the club premises licence, if I may make a comment. And I don't want to steal Anthony's thunder, and he would come in and correct me. But some of those conditions, by bringing them over, I mean, I'm not so sure that those conditions were actually on there relevant, enforceable, or appropriate. And if I quote the Bristol case, well, it's a stated case that is in statute. It doesn't allow councils just to bring conditions over or on. They've got to justify why they are doing it. And Anthony will correct me on this, I'm sure. But I think we've got to be. My view is we've got to be careful. Some of these tidying up of club licenses or transferring over, it's not saying that those conditions are on there actually were appropriate or actually were correct. And I would question, a couple of them that are on there. So to have a new license with unenforceable conditions on them wouldn't be a way forward, I don't think.
No, I understand that. I was trying to get a summary of what Mr. Bebb was proposing by referring to those which were put.
Yeah.
Wasn't suggesting that they would be taken
Sorry,
over.
I thought.
I understand his position, and I think that they do, apart from this the extended number of users that he remarked on a moment ago. Is that? Did you have a comment on that, Anthony? Is that? I think.
No, that's fair. And Graham, Mr. Wren accurately summarises the position in terms of bringing conditions over. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, a condition saying you can't smoke within the building would be irrelevant because it's illegal anyway, for example.
Yes.
Okay. Lindsay or Abdul, would you like to ask a question of clarification, Mr. Bebb?
Yes, Lindsay here. What would we need to do to be able to look at those 23 conditions to see whether any of them were still appropriate? And my other question is, if none of those 23 conditions go across, what exposure does that put on Mr. Bebb?
What exposure?
Yes, well, if the condition's there to stop it happening and you remove it, what's the impact on Mr. Bebb?
Did you understand the question, Mr. Bebb?
Oh, yes, I do. I didn't know it was a question to me. I thought it was to you, Chair. Sorry.
I'm going to ask you.
So,
I wasn't asking Mr. Bebb. I was actually asking a combination of Graham and Anthony, because it's the effect. We've got a current situation where there are 23 conditions. I acknowledge that some of those conditions may now not be still relevant because of the time they were put in, such as the smoking ban. But of those 23, a number of them would still be relevant. And if they were relevant, could we transfer them across? And if we didn't put any of the 23 across, then what would be the impact on Mr. Bebb? Now, the latter one can be to both, but my question's aimed at both the licensing and the legal side on that point, and then maybe following the responses, a comment from Mr. Bebb.
Okay, can either of you respond to that?
I'll just briefly, I've just quickly looked at some of the conditions there, and straight away I've gone into the numbers, which is the old fire restriction numbers, which the fire officers used to come round and give a number. They don't do that anymore. And how I've referred to the Bristol case, and part of that case refers to if legislation is covered in another area, the Licensing Act is not encouraged to duplicate that legislation, if you like, because it's already applies somewhere else. And just briefly, I've got one in front of me, about 90 persons in the club lounge. You know, and this is quite a long question. I mean, to be fair, members and guests leaving the club with full glasses, full or empty. That's not a, you know, that's quite a common one these days, to be honest. But stipulations, we haven't spoken about the licensing area or the consumption area. That's another story. I mean, glasses being used outside, if the car park was brought into it, that's quite reasonable to discuss that. But inside on the patio, that would be unreasonable to use plastic glasses on the patio, for example, because it's enclosed. It's a long answer. It's not an easy one. Drinking up time is no longer a licensed activity, but obviously the main ones are the fire doors. But I can only emphasise again, we're dealing with Mr. Bev. Environmental Health haven't made a representation, so they are the experts on noise.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay?
No, that's quite right. Just backing up what Mr. Wren says, legally, absolutely correct. There's no point in putting conditions where existing protections are there. For example, planning matters you wouldn't be able to consider under the Licensing Act. Simple as that.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay?
So what you're saying is, are the vast majority of the 23 not transferable because of changes in the law, their planning? And are there any that are still relevant?
Is that to me? So I'd have to go through them. I mean, certainly planning never was it in the first place. It wasn't in 2005 and it isn't now.
I acknowledge planning, because if something's a planning issue, then it's to do with the planning and not licensing. I understand that.
But can I just make a comment? I mean, in 2005, there were no laid down police conditions. When a lot of these came over, you didn't get, unless it was a nightclub, for example, the police weren't involved in it. So now it's run without any police conditions because there's been no problems, no review or anything like that. It's only at a time like this when police conditions, or the modern police conditions, if for want of a better word, can be put in, and Gary would be able to comment. But they are quite stringent, and they're not there at the moment, you see, under a club license, but they would be imposed, not for want of anybody doing anything wrong, like I said in my address on my writing. But they are quite stringent and they are enforceable. So your question is, can we bring those 23? I haven't counted them, to be honest. It's going to be a matter for the committee and the legal advisor to advise out of this hearing. I would suggest it might go on.
We might end up deliberating, but I'm just wondering whether we need to debate them individually, because people may have different views and may wish to persuade the panel, Mr. Bebb in particular, that these are applicable when we might take a contrary view. Would it be possible to go through these individually? Would that be a sound way forward? So on page 47, it's Annex 3, isn't it? And 4 and 5. Would it be possible to go through those?
You're asking me?
Well, I'm chairman, I suppose I have to decide. It's Annex 3. Perhaps you can guide us, Mr. Wren.
I haven't got all the
extract what you think considered here are conditions and give us guidance of your view as whether they are transferable, and we can see whether anyone else wishes to contest your view.
Page 47 of the documents pack.
Yes. Starting with Annex 3.
Bear with me, I'm reading.
I mean, the first one says that the members are expected only to drink in moderation. I would have thought that was not a condition because it's not defined properly. It's just a bit of,
I agree.
Just an introduction. And the second paragraph good signage to indicate acceptable levels of behaviour and dress code. I think, well, it looks to me that this is too vague. I think someone mentioned earlier on that the conditions have to be enforceable and clear. Well, actually, I mean, it's not a condition, is it? It says conditions at the top, but in itself, it's not a condition on the club premises certificate, is it?
No, Councillor Bowring, it's akin to a preamble.
Yes. Exactly. So Anthony, where's the first condition that we could just to see whether it's transferable or not?
Really, what they are, I mean, the licensing objectives are there, and the premises must abide by the licensing objectives. What they're saying seems to be under A, B, C, D, and E is effectively commenting on how they comply with the licensing objections. So I can go through it line by line, but that would take a very long time. And rather than be prescriptive and specific, the licensing objectives are wide enough to prevent the harm, any harm complained of. So prevention of crime and disorder. I mean, you wouldn't say that misbehaviour is covered under the club's constitution. Well, that's not relevant. Any member expelled from the club may only have his membership reinstated. Again, that's not relevant. We wouldn't be able to enforce that. Misbehaviour does that include criminal conduct, or does that include? We could go on and on and on. My view is legally that the objective itself is enough to prevent prevention of crime and disorder for the premises to abide by.
I think you could put a condition on in a particular case under consideration to say that the licensing authority has determined that to comply, you need to do this.
Yes, absolutely.
Members and their guests are not permitted to leave the club with glasses, full or empty. This is enforced strictly by bar staff. Off sales are not allowed. That's a condition which could be transferred, couldn't it?
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
Unenforceable.
Yes.
So I'm having trouble finding 23 here. Public safety completed a risk assessment, and our health and safety policy is in place, and staff have been familiar. Well, that's not a condition, is it?
And given that environmental health, fire authority, etc., have all given them the premises a clean bill of health, you can presume that they are compliant with public safety. That's for the panel, of course, but
yeah. So I have difficulty finding 23 conditions here. Wait, why do I see 23 conditions, Mr. Bebb?
Right. Okay, we'd like me to count them. So if we start with Annex 1 on page 46, the way I've gone about the counting is to include the mandatory conditions, and under there are 3, 4, 5 mandatory conditions relating to exhibition of films. If I may step back for a moment.
Those mandatory conditions in the premises, they should have been inserted by by licensing, shouldn't they?
I don't know.
Are they, Mr. Wren? Are they in the application?
The mandatory conditions should be, yes, Chair. Yes.
Oh, fine. So that's Appendix 1, Annex 1 dealt with.
Annex 1, yes.
Okay. Annex 2. What do you see in there, Mr. Bebb?
And there are some conditions around notification of change of name or address. So in stating 23 conditions, I did not, in my representation, suggest that they should be all carried across. I think the point I've tried to get across is that the application, as it stands, contains insufficient conditions to promote the licensing objectives, wherever those come from. and that a full assessment, as required by the licensing authority, should be carried out by the applicant before the license can be approved.
Yes,
And
can I ask
that
you-
is simply in line with the licensing policy.
I asked
So
you about-
whether any of these are relevant or not, I think they may be or they may be not. And I think it's the applicant's responsibility to provide appropriate conditions to promote the licensing objectives rather than this hearing, because as others have indicated, I think it would take a very long time and longer than this hearing has to do the work of the applicant.
Okay, I thought you said that there were 23 conditions in there, and apart from the difference between the two types of license, you thought that, in your view, they would have covered the conditions that you were in favour of?
No.
Well, I apologise, I misunderstood.
Can I just make a comment, Chair, please?
Yep.
As the Licensing Act recommends that any applicant should contact the licensing authority for guidance. This was carried out. Mr. Boardman contacted the licensing department. As I said in my report there, myself and the police have attended. We have reviewed the application, as has the licensing manager, Julia O'Brien, that's been present for a number of years, and the licensing application was accepted, there was no fear about the licensing objectives, as we obviously see these licenses all the time. The backup would be, obviously, if there were problems, every premises licence is answerable to predominantly the police and environmental health. I'll just make that comment.
Thank you. I think we were with you, Lindsay. Lindsay?
Yes. I think a bit inconclusive, actually. I think there's some mandatory ones that have obviously been transferred across, which gives me some guidance. I think on what the others were there, I think it's clear that some were not appropriate anymore. But I don't know whether there was any of those at the residual there that were originally covered, which get lost as a result of transferring across to premises license. But there has been a discussion as part of the general debate here, is that there can be extra safeguards because certain things are now built in, particularly on the police side, for example. So I think it's a bit of swings and roundabouts, but I was looking at things like, we discussed windows earlier, and there isn't anything in the license that particularly precludes windows being opened. I personally think that's quite a restrictive thing, but there may be good reasons for it. I don't know. It's 4.7 metres isn't far, and if people are shouting their heads off, I could understand. But a really hot day, I could understand the windows wanting to be opened. So I think I'm just trying to find what is safeguards for Mr. Bebb going forward within what we're discussing at the change of the license. I wouldn't want us to transfer across to a premises license and then somebody say in a couple of weeks' time, oh, A, B, and C have been missed out, and that means this happens. That's what I think that's what I'm really looking at. I'm looking for guidance from those who are involved in this as to say, you know, if something's been replaced by new up-to-date law like the smoking, that's clear. But there are others which are grey, and I think it's that area that I think I want to have some clarification on, and I suspect it's not possible during this hearing.
Okay, Abdul?
Thank you, Chair. No, I've listened very carefully what Mr. Bibb has said, but looking at prevention, you know, like we have 4 categories to discuss, and out of that, I've listened very carefully what Mr. Bibb said. However, again, there could be not the right time to ask that question. He did echo 7.1 licensing, 7.4 and 7.5. I was just wondering if Graham could sort of highlight a little bit of that, because he did say we have failed as the local authority, or our policy has failed, before I go into further question.
Sorry, I've got 7.1 of the 186.
Yes, I particularly like to hear from 7.1 to 7.5.
Because Mr. Bebb said we were not conforming to those paragraphs in our licensing policy.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right, I haven't got that to hand, I'm afraid. I'm going to have to look it up. I've got the 186 guidance in front of me. You're going to have to give me some time to look that one up, I'm afraid.
Okay, then maybe the other question regarding operating schedules. This word has came out a lot, including our chairman. If this was implemented, do you think it would be life more easy for us to understand how this is going to be in operation? Graham?
The operating schedule. Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah,
Sorry,
that's it. The operating schedule I'm talking about. Yeah. Or is this not part of the objectives? If not, then I don't want to go into that.
Sorry, can you just say the end of your question again, please?
The question was the word operating schedules was coming up again and again. If there were to one front of us, would it be helpful to understand what Mr. Bebb is asking, how the operation going to be going on once if this is were to go ahead or not?
We have the operating schedule.
Plus the police conditions, which would have to be formally accepted at this meeting. And from what Anthony was saying about the licensing objectives.
Okay, I thought, well, I'm probably misheard. I thought Mr. Bebb said we didn't have anything. He didn't really seem to understand, or I didn't really probably understand. Mr. Bebb, do you want to comment to that?
Yes, certainly. So I referred to paragraph 7.4 of the licensing policy,
7.4,
which states that the applicants should define steps. Let me find the place. Oh, yes. Should define such steps as are required to deal with the identified issues should be included within the applicant's.
Sorry, Mr. Bebb, can I ask what document you're referring to and what date? Is it the Woking Borough Council Statement of Licensing Policy, Licensing Act 2003, September 2018?
Hang on. Yes, the full reference is the Council Statement of Licensing Policy issued in September 2018, which I've been referring to as the licensing policy.
Thank you.
And paragraph 7.5, which Councillor Loyes referred to there, says, where premises are located near to noise-sensitive areas, e.g. residential premises or places of worship, the licensee should initially identify any particular issues which are likely to adversely affect the promotion of the objective to prevent public nuisance. Such steps as are required to deal with these identified issues should be included within the applicant's operating schedule, which is a part of his application form. And I see nothing in the application that provides those steps or identifies those issues. So the application, I think, is invalid.
Okay, yep. We got that. You made that point before. That's fine to underline it.
I did. Councillor Loyes raised it again.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Thank you for clarification, Mr. Bebb.
Right, Lindsay, anything else to ask Mr. Bebb?
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay, and Mr. Boardman or Mr. Brooks? Any questions from Mr. Bebb?
Not from me.
Nope, you're both content. Mr. Clark. Any questions from the police? Nope, you're muted, but I can see you shaking your head. Mr. Wren? No?
Thank you.
Right, so let's see, whiz up to the I think I'll just ask whether anyone else wishes to raise anything. Just make sure we can all confirm we've had a fair hearing before we retire to deliberate. Has anybody else? I haven't missed anything out, have I, Luciano? to discuss. Anybody else wish to raise any questions or points of view, points for clarification or anything?
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we're up to point 18 now. So all parties other than the subcommittee and sports staff, Woking Borough Council's Legal and Democratic Services are asked to leave the hearing. And I would like to thank you very much. It's been a very long hearing, but a thorough one, I hope. And trust everyone is happy that they've been listened to and been given the opportunity to air their opinions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
We get 5 working days, and the result of
That's
the
correct, Chair. And a decision notice will be published on the website as well. But all the interested parties, they will receive a decision letter via email.
Yeah, and the police.
Yes.
Does everybody get it? Does a fire authority get it? Does it go to everybody? It's a matter of interest, or just those at this meeting?
It goes to the licensing department. I don't know if the licensing department forwards it to the police or other authorities.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Good. Have a nice rest of the day.